Hello, everyone. Welcome in to another episode of the TakeCast. Davis Mattek here with you. I am joined today by Jared Dubin from last night in basketball. The NBA season began last night, 2-game slate. We have a huge 10-game slate, and the season really is going to get, it's going to get going in earnest. Jared, I'm very excited. My team, the Oklahoma City Thunder, kind of the talk of the town, which is very new. Obviously, has not really been the case. Wasn't even really the case last year. Your team, the New York Knickerbockers, also the talk of the town. Maybe not so much for the reason that you would want. I obviously remain a little bit more optimistic about the New York Knicks than their results on the opening night against the Boston Celtics would show.
Yeah, I mean, well, things can't get any worse, certainly, than they were last night against the Celtics. You might not see another shooting performance like that the entire season, given the way they shot from three. And that's not to say that it was lucky. They had the Knicks defense in hell throughout the entire night. They basically just ran action directly at Karl Anthony Towns whenever he was on the floor. And then when he wasn't, they ran it directly at Jericho Sims. And that got them pretty much whatever they wanted on offense. And in the first half, Mikal Bridges' jumper looked scary. In the second half, thankfully, I thought it looked a little bit better. But the Knicks were shooting something like 60% and still getting waxed at one point. It's just there's really nothing you could do when the other team plays like that. And, as far as your team goes, I picked them to win the title. So I had them first place in the West and winning the title over Boston. So I'm very high on them this year, especially once Isaiah Hartenstein gets back.
All right, well, it is my podcast, so we can go ahead and begin with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So here are my concerns as a fan. The first is high-level playoff experience. They don't really have it. In fact, their first kind of run at it, they did pretty poorly. I think they lost to a team that is not as good as them. Now, obviously, Luka is a way better player than Shea. I don't think anyone would really argue that. Even Shea himself might even say that Luka is a better player. Well, Shea, if you included all the defense and the steals and everything, maybe you could argue their on-court impact is sort of similar. But the big issue with Oklahoma City's roster, let's say Shea just doesn't have it on a given night. Where are you going to get buckets? Where are you going to get shot creation? I mean, obviously, wing Jalen Williams, great rookie season. He's awesome. Chet, I mean, I theoretically, I suppose you could two-man game him and kind of pick and pop and let him back down if there's a smaller guy against him. But they don't really have, all these great teams kind of always have a secondary wing dribbler. The great Warriors teams had it. The Cavs teams had it. Do you think, I mean, are the Thunder are they just a lock to make an in-season trade? Is that really the answer? They have all these assets. They have more draft picks than they could even stash on their roster. Are they going to make a trade?
I would think that, Sam Presti will feel out what happens, obviously, between now and February, particularly after Hartenstein gets back. And I think you're right in diagnosing the potential biggest issue. That was something I wrote about in the season preview that I did for the Thunder, where I think one of the biggest things that could happen for them is Jalen Williams becoming a threat to shoot off the dribble threes. That's not something they had in their offense last year. I think if I'm remembering correctly, they made like 20 of them all season, which was the fewest in the league. Shea is one of the best off the dribble creators in the league, if not the best, but it's mostly for mid range stuff and floaters and shorter pull ups and things like that. To be able to stretch the defense in the ways that matter the most in the playoffs, you got to have somebody that can hit pull up threes or guys that are going to catch and shoot threes at a really high volume. And the issue with their 3-point shooters, at least the last couple seasons, has been Lou Dort doesn't get guarded like a shooter, even if he makes them like he did last year.
Right.
He doesn't shoot them at an incredibly high volume. The one guy that does get them up at really high volume is Isaiah Joe, who doesn't play that many minutes with the starting group and is somewhat of a liability, at least in other areas other than shooting. And then obviously Shea doesn't shoot a lot of threes. And then J Dub and Chet didn't have a high volume of threes last year either. So they got to get up more of them. And I think specifically having someone who can make them off the dribble, which to me, the most likely guy to do that is Jalen Williams. And then having Caruso and Hartenstein, I do think gives them a little bit of a different look than they were able to present in the playoffs last year, just because Caruso gets guarded a little bit more like a shooter than someone like Dort does, or I'm trying to or like Cason Wallace does, even though Cason Wallace is a very good shooter, teams were kind of letting him shoot. And then Hartenstein brings an element of dribble handoff and short roll playmaking that they didn't have as much of last year. Even though you would like, I think Chet should be able to do that. Hartenstein does it at such a high level already. And the Knicks were able to basically change their entire offense last year in the middle of the season because of what Hartenstein could do in those areas. And I think OKC, like Mark Dagnall, is smart enough. The other players are good enough. They're going to be able to figure out how to use that once he gets back.
So for the uninitiated, people might be like, Isaiah Hartenstein. I mean, he's all right. He's okay. What is it so specifically about adding him that has like real NBA nerds so excited about Oklahoma City to the point that they go from being like, well, it's a good story, they're young and they're fun, to now people are like, no, they're going to be the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. They are going to challenge Denver in a Western Conference Finals. Like, what is it about his game that gets him there?
So the big thing is he's just a really, really good defender. And you saw that especially once he came in for Mitchell Robinson last year for the Knicks. He had, among players that played more than 15 minutes a game, he was the league leader in defensive RPM, which basically measures how many points per 100 possessions you make your team's defense better when you're on the court. And that was him by number 1 in the league. And he's a really, really good rim protector. His rim protection numbers were even better than Chet Holmgren's last year. And Chet was one of the better rim protectors in the league. And unlike a lot of other big men who are really good rim protectors, he is able to handle himself in space pretty well. Is not going to get totally destroyed if you bring him out to the perimeter. It's not his strength. And there are guys that will victimize him, but he's not going to just be terrible out there to the point where you can't switch anything with him, or it's a death sentence if you get him guarding a wing in the late in the shot clock or things like that. And then on the other end, he has the pick and roll dive man kind of skills where he can roll to the rim, be a vertical spacer, finish those lobs. But he's such a good passer and such a smart player that you can't necessarily run your offense through him, but you can make him a way station, somebody that sort of helps connect the two sides of your offense together, and someone who can run dribble handoffs with pretty much anybody. And when you do get him on the ball, if the opposing big man steps up, he can make the right pass, whether to somebody under the basket or somebody else in the perimeter. He's just one of those guys that does things that don't necessarily show up, which I hate using that phrase, but he does. And it's just like the winning plays kind of things that you get from that kind of big man. It's just a guy that is a connector, I think, on both ends of the court.
So that's the top of the Western Conference. The Boston Celtics, I mean, we did see on opening night, unbelievable three-point shooting, unbelievable defense, unbelievable, just kind of everything. Just kind of everything. They're just very good. But it's such a fascinating case study in the modern NBA where we are used to effectively needing a top 5 player, an MVP player. Jayson Tatum kind of always finishes 5th in MVP voting, even though, no one really thinks Tatum is the most valuable player in the league. I don't know why I feel this way, and maybe this is just totally wrong, but it does sort of feel like the Celtics are a fragile super team, if that makes sense, where it's like, I get how it all works together. I get they totally have the math game solved. Tatum and Brown can create a lot of shots. They can kind of make the Kobe Bryant shots. They make the hero shots, which if you're going to be a championship team, you do just need a guy who can beat math, basically. Like that's kind of how it works. You just need a guy who can bend the math of the game to their will. Something about watching them tear through the NBA, I don't know, it just kind of leaves me hollow. And maybe there's something wrong with the way I watch the NBA. Is that do you agree with that at all? Is that insane? Where are you at with the Celtics?
No, I think it's something that a lot of people feel, and I think that that's why a lot of people were reluctant last year to consider them sort of the all-time great team that a lot of the numbers painted them as. Because sometimes when you watch them, it's like they should be better than this, specifically on offense, because they have so much talent and they can do pretty much everything you want an offensive team to do. And sometimes it seems like they just sort of collectively short circuit in, and it seems that way, especially in crunch time and big moments. And then you look up at the end of the year they also had the best crunch time offense in the league, which like doesn't compute when you watch
No.
them a lot of times. But the thing about that is, as frustrating as they are to watch at times, you said it, like they've solved the math game. And even if Tatum is doing stuff that looks terrible on a given night, well, they still have Jaylen Brown. They still have Porzingis, specifically last year, where he was just hitting everything from deep, and he's become early in his career, he was a very bad post up player to the point that Rick Carlisle had to be like, listen, we're not posting you up because you're not good at it. And he hated that. The last couple of years, he's been one of the most efficient post scorers in the league. You add that to what Jaylen can do, Tatum can do. Then you have Drew Holiday, who has like the lowest usage rate of his career, but was also a guy who was an all-star. And then Derek White suddenly becoming a guy who shoots a million threes and makes all of them and can do stuff off the dribble. Like he was their most efficient pick and roll player last year, which is crazy on a team with Tatum and Brown. And then Al Horford's like your sixth guy. There's just so much there for them that even when it doesn't look as good as you think it should, it's still better than almost everybody else.
I think you're right. I think it basically is just that when it doesn't work in crunch time, kind of similar to the Chris Paul, James Harden Rockets, where it's like, yeah, they're this great team. The numbers say they're great. The overall numbers say they're awesome in crunch time. But when it goes bad in crunch time, it's just like, my God, this is a G League team. They can't do anything. They can't get to the basket. They can't draw a free throw, which is of course unfair. Obviously this analysis is very unfair to the Boston Celtics. They are kind of they are the best team in the NBA until proven.
When you're talking about a team that good, everything you're saying is a nitpick. But that's what you have to do. The nitpicks can make the difference between being a really good team that loses in the finals or the conference finals and a team that gets to the finals and is like, oh yeah, you can't compete with us.
So the overall Eastern Conference, I think, I've been listening to a lot of season preview stuff, been thinking about a lot of these rotations, and the top of the Eastern Conference, not including the Celtics. I don't think the Celtics are very fragile at all. Honestly, I think they could take a Jayson Tatum sprained ankle or Jaylen Brown missing 2 weeks for what I think they'd be fine. But the Bucks, the 76ers, the top of the Eastern Conference, you could tell me a lot of different things. Like you could tell me this is another season from hell for the Bucks where like Dame can't buy a shot. I mean, it's October 23rd right now, and where's Chris Middleton? No one knows. Like Chris Middleton is just Eastern Conference. Kawhi Leonard. And then the 76ers, I mean, is opening night, and they're just like, Embiid's not going to play, and Paul George isn't going to play, and it's just like all maxi. Now, Drummond as a backup center for the 76ers, I mean, why has Andre Drummond just not been a 76er for the last 3 years? Why was he ever on the Bulls when he's the perfect backup center for the 76ers?
That's why Embiid called him on the day free agency opened. He was like, I need you. Drummond said that, I think, at media day, which makes sense. Like the dude is going to grab every single rebound, maybe not defensive rebounds, and he might let a bunch of other guys grab defensive rebounds because he's chasing stuff, but he's big, he's physical. Over the last few years, I think he's gotten a little bit better defensively. And when you just need someone to come in and play 12 minutes a night behind one of the better centers in the league, it's really annoying to play against that dude. And I think that helps you a lot. But, to your larger point, all of these teams, I think from 2 to 5 in the East that everybody generally considers, Philly, Milwaukee, the Knicks, and why am I forgetting a team? The Cavs, I think are sort of fragile in their own ways. You brought up Chris Middleton. Giannis hasn't made it through the playoffs healthy each of the last 2 years. It's not like you necessarily expect him to get hurt, but it has happened. Brook Lopez, he was really good again last year, but he had a back issue that kept him out a few years ago.
35, 36 years old?
That's exactly where I was getting next. He's been in the league forever. He already doesn't move really well. You get a 5% drop off from Brook Lopez, you're looking at a much different defense. Dame's been hurt the last couple of years. Philly, like you said, Embiid never plays. Paul George doesn't play that much until coincidentally when he was in a contract year. The Knicks already have health issues. Robinson and Achua are out. OG always gets hurt. They got 6.5 guys right now, maybe. Everybody on Cleveland's gotten hurt the last few years too. And they always have that issue of nobody guards the fifth guy on the court. So there are issues, I think, with all of those teams.
All right, let me give you my hot take. So the overarching part of this hot take is, I think, because of everything we just mentioned with all those teams, like, it's so weird. The Cavs could be pretty ripe for an in-season trade, where we've been doing this dichotomy forever of, like, it's pretty clear the Evan Mobley, Jared Allen thing works defensively but doesn't work offensively. Evan Mobley needs to be a center, but why would you not want to play Jared Allen when he's, like, pretty clearly one of your best players? So you got to find a way to make it work, but none of the coaches there have been able to do so. The Orlando Magic. If the Orlando Magic can get to, I don't know, let's call it 11th in the NBA in offense. Last year, they were 24th in points per 100 possessions on offense, which by Magic standards is, like, honestly a good season. I think Zach Lowe always says the stat. It's like they for like 13 years in a row or something, they've been bottom 10 in points per 100 possessions, which, like, you'd think you could just magically kind of like back into 13th in the NBA in offense or something, but they have not been able to do it. Now, obviously, one of their guys is just going to have to play much better. Is just going to have to improve a lot. It could be Paolo Banchero kind of takes the leap. You know, we see this happen with guys his age, of his prototype, quite a bit. It could be Jalen Suggs makes 39% of his three-pointers and is taking them off the dribble. It could be Franz Wagner. But that's kind of my take. I think that they're so good defensively, and NBA defense tends to translate season to season pretty well, especially when there's a lot of continuity. And I guess I don't know a ton about their asset situation, but my God, if they could get a point guard. I mean, a point guard on this team would go so far. But and the other thing is the Magic are young, so they're not resting guys like the way the Bucks are going to be resting Dame and Giannis. The guys will mostly be playing every night. I think the Magic could be like a good 2 or 3 seed in the Eastern Conference.
I mean, they were really good already last year, like you said, with an offense that was at times barely functional, specifically when they had guys out and it was asking Paolo to do everything by himself. You would think that Franz Wagner has to shoot better than he did last year, just given how much his shooting dropped off, specifically in the second half of the season. But then he wasn't shooting well in the Olympics this summer either. So who knows how much that's going to work out. Paolo, I do think, can get a little bit more efficient. He can make a little bit better decisions with the ball in terms of when he's shooting and when he's getting off the ball or getting it back. Maybe be a little bit more decisive with his post ups and with his drives, really lean into the physicality that he has. They also they need to get up way more threes. Jalen Suggs was already a really good shooter last year, but if he ramps up the volume a little bit, I think KCP being there will help, just because he's going to shoot more than Gary Harris did when he was in the starting lineup. If Wendell Carter is healthier this year and they're starting him instead of Goga Batadze or Mo Wagner for most of the season, that's another guy that takes a little bit more threes, even though both Batadze and the older Wagner are good players. Whether they can get up to like a borderline top 10 offense, I'm a little bit skeptical, just because they don't have the creation for others aspect, which you brought up. Most of their guys are create for themselves kind of guys. And it's a little bit difficult if you don't share the ball at a super high level, unless you have a guy who's like a true apex creator type, like Luca or LeBron or, prime James Harden or whoever it is. And they obviously don't really have that specific guy. But if they get to league average, that's a much better team than it was already last year. And if they bring in somebody who can be a little bit more of that run the show guy, even if it does take some touches away from Paolo and Franz, that would probably do them a little bit better, just because the touches that they do get will result in easier shots and they'll be freed up to do more of the things that they're also good at.
So who would be available in the trade market? The one thing that I think the play-in is almost working as intended. Like, people were pretty skeptical about the play-in. Like, what's it going to do? So the first thing is that there are not really too many fire sellers every year. I mean, obviously this year will be a little bit different, I suppose, because there is like a theoretically generational number 1 pick waiting to be taken. And Cooper Flag, there was not that last year. I mean, gonna be honest, like I like the NBA and I follow the NBA, but the draft happened and I'm like, I've never heard of these guys. like is that Ricochet? No clue. Honestly, no idea. So that won't be the same. But like, is there an obvious spot where like we could see a high level guard being traded or a disgruntled superstar? Like, because that's kind of the thing. I mean, Jimmy Butler actually I think is sort of interesting if the Heat decide to go not that he would be a fit there, just as I'm thinking about guys who could be traded. James Harden, I mean, not that James Harden would be a great Magic player, and the Clippers don't own their picks, so they are not going to be super incentivized to do that. But is there kind of an obvious guy after Markkanen signed the extension with the Jazz of like, oh, this is the year of the blank player sweepstakes?
I don't know that there's necessarily an obvious guy. I do think a couple guys on the Jazz, aside from Markkanen, could be a good fit for them. Like if they got Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson, I think that would help. It's obviously not the true, run the show type of guy that we mentioned, but another guy that can create off the dribble for a team that has one guy that's really good at it, and he hasn't been efficient enough to justify the level of individual creation that he's taken on so far. Obviously, like including myself, everybody expects that he will get better and more efficient in that area, but you need to see that actually happen. So bringing in another guy that can do that, I think would help them a lot. You look at the other really bad teams in the league, though, like you don't want Jordan Poole. Anthony Simons is maybe the guy, and I'm not in love with it, especially because he really does not fit with the way they play defensively. The next time he plays defense might be the first time, but that's Washington, that's Portland. I'm trying to think who else. I don't think San Antonio would trade Chris Paul. Like they brought him in specifically to be like this guy sort of at Wembanyama's side the entire season. So I don't think that would necessarily work out. You brought up Cleveland. Maybe there is finally a Darius Garland trade. He's not necessarily the best version of that kind of player, but we've seen him play at a really, really high level as a guy with the ball in his hands a lot, shooting really well from three and distributing really well too. So maybe that could be something where if things aren't going perfectly for both of those teams, they could figure something out.
I've got a nuclear take, and this is probably more fan fiction than anything else. But what about one of the Pistons guards? What about Cade Cunningham or Jaden Ivey? I'm assuming the Cade package would have to be the Gobert package, basically, 7 first-round picks and a swap and two good young players or whatever. Like, probably not. But Jaden Ivey, I mean, Jaden Ivey's a good player, more of a shooting guard, obviously, than I don't know. He's probably not a very good passer. Maybe more in my imagination. But like the whole Pistons thing, and I actually don't know who's in that front office now, but like I don't understand that roster at all. And this is year 4 for Cade, and we are still waiting. There's been like 13 quarters of Cade looking like the guy that we think Cade Cunningham is supposed to be. I just don't understand that experiment at all.
Yeah, it's Trajan Langdon running that front office now, who obviously I would imagine most people would remember from Duke and has been in the Pelicans front office the last bunch of years. I don't think they would trade Cade. Like they just signed him to the Mammoth extension.
He just got the extension.
And that also complicates the way you can trade for him because of base year compensation issues, which if people don't know what that is, good. You shouldn't. It's way too complicated. But for people like me that nerd out on the salary cap, it's really difficult to trade a player who has a much lower salary now than he will next year, just because of the way the salary matching rules work. On Jaden Ivey, I do think it's a little bit more in theory than reality in terms of his ability to create for others. But we also don't know how the Pistons feel about him yet. We don't know how they feel really about anybody. The only thing we know is that they gave Cade his extension. They paid Tobias Harris, and they drafted. Why am I blanking on who they drafted?
I have no idea.
They drafted Ron Holland and
sure, why not?
I can't remember who else. They drafted somebody else too.
Dennis Jenkins? No, he's on a two-way, so he was a UDFA. I mean, I guess you know what their path is. Their path very similar to his twin brother's team, the Rockets. Asar Thompson and Amen Thompson becoming credible, not even 3-point shooters, just shooters. How about you make a 14-foot jump shot, Thompson brothers, like that, because they both of them are actually so good. Like they play vertically so well. The defense is like unbelievable, even on these crappy teams. That's some I do love. I mean, you can definitely tell I'm getting old when I'm talking about defensive intensity on these crappy teams from these like really young players. But if you can show me like really strong defensive intensity on a 31-win team, I'm like, okay, you can probably make it. You probably have a way to contribute to an NBA roster. But man, neither Thompson brother can shoot at all, which is so strange. This is like neither here nor there, not really about this NBA season, but it is so strange to me that there's this like sub variety of NBA player, the guy who's like the five tool prospect, like to make the baseball analogy, who can do everything. They can dribble, they can pass, they can defend, they understand the game, they have great spatial awareness, but they can't shoot 22-foot jump shots in a game. I actually don't really understand how it happens. Like, it's just something about basketball that does not make any sense to me.
Yeah, and I mean, especially with them, they're ridiculous athletes. They're so smart on the court. You can tell they know exactly where to be and why they should be there. They seem to know, especially Amen Thompson, knows where everybody else is supposed to be and why they should be there. I think he's got a little bit more of the playmaking instincts than his brother does. And I love watching both of them, like absolutely adore them. Amen Thompson is one of like already like my 10 favorite guys in the league to watch just because of the way he was able to do things last year. But you're right. Like if they could consistently make 12-foot shots, just be viable anywhere outside the immediate area of the rim, that opens up so many different things for them. And especially it opens things up for them as potential playmakers, which is one of their best skills. But if you lay off somebody like teams did to Rajon Rondo, where you're guarding him at the free throw line where he has the ball at the top of the key, if you're a Rajon Rondo level passer, you can figure that out. And I think it's possible that Amen at least can be a really, really high level passer. Rondo's one of the best of, the 10-year period that he was in the league. I don't know if he can get there, but it's really difficult to run an offense that way if you're the guy with the ball in your hands all the time and your guy is totally clogging the lane. It's even more difficult to run an offense like that than when you're off the ball and your guy is totally clogging the lane, because at least somebody else has the ball at some point. So just becoming viable would be a huge step for them.
It definitely would. Becoming viable. I mean, it's never what you want to be the discussion about your career in your second or third year. Like, all we need you to do is become viable. Let's actually do, before we get into this in the Western Conference stuff, let's do a little bit of Rookie of the Year. Is it just as simple as Zach Edey was actually way underdrafted and is like super NBA ready and is going to be a starting center for the Memphis Grizzlies, a good team right away? Like, it's so funny because this was such an international heavy draft class and stuff. Like, people like me like have basically no idea what to expect. Like, is Rishashe going to start for the Atlanta Hawks? Is he better than Zach Edey? Is he one of these? Is he Ousmane Dieng but French? Like, I mean, I really don't know. I am excited to watch Edey play though, because like that's such a throwback type of guy. Like, is there anyone else even like Edey in the NBA right now? Not really.
I think Boban would be the guy who comes the closest. But Edey, I think, moves a little bit better, and he's a little bit more efficient in terms of the way that he's able to get himself to his spots rather than just being totally enormous. He is able to do a little bit of stuff with the ball to get himself a little bit better position. Watching him in the few preseason things that I saw is so funny. It's like they totally cleared out one side and just let him back his guy down like he was Hakeem Olajuwon or Patrick Ewing or whoever else. It really did look like it was like 1996 out there. It was so funny. And he's taking like these little half hooks or just like pump faking 3 times in the lane and then putting up the half hook. And like a true drop step and the little finger roll from the left side with the inside right hand. Like, it's so funny what he's able to do out there. I think he's going to be wildly productive on an individual level just because he's going to be naturally so efficient, whether it's as a finisher, an offensive rebounder, a post up guy. It's just going to be very difficult to keep him off the glass and to keep him from scoring efficiently. The things I'm worried about are his foot speed and space on defense. He is a very good athlete, especially for his size, but the NBA game is just so much faster than it is in college. The players are such better athletes, and the things that you're able to do in college defensively are not necessarily things you're always going to get away with in the NBA. Like he should be a good rim protector just by standing there, but we've seen guys that are good rim protectors still get taken advantage of defensively because they have other limitations. And then I'm curious how his offensive style is going to mesh with John Morant and with the rest of that offense, who want to get out in the open court, want to play a lot of pick and roll and spread style stuff. If you're running all your pick and rolls with Edie, does that mean Jared Jackson is stashed in the corner? How does he fit in terms of like the handoff game and stuff with Desmond Bain that they were able to do a lot of when Steven Adams was the center, or even Jonas Valanciunas was the center? We got to see how he fares with that stuff. So I'm just interested to see how it happens, but he should be so productive in the minutes that he's like, I could see him averaging a double double in like 26 minutes a night and getting rookie of the year like that.
I mean, like theoretically, the offensive fit should be okay. Like he should be able to roll. I don't know. Like is he going to be mobile enough in the NBA to like finish lobs? Like I would think so, but maybe the NBA game it's a lot different. The spaces are a lot tighter. It's a lot faster. A lot of what he was doing in college is you're not going to be able to just like toss him the ball 10 feet away from the basket. Like sometimes, but not 11 times a game. Like
No,
the dump it off offense. It just doesn't really work so much anymore.
no. And I mean, I think what people don't understand about the way the NBA offenses work now is that it's because the defenses are so much. Everybody likes to say the NBA they don't play defense. It's just the defense that they play is so much different and more complex and more advanced than anything we ever like. It was literally illegal to play defense in the 1990s and early 2000s the way every single team, like you could not do anything that NBA teams do defensively today. All of it was illegal in the 1990s. And the
Right.
offenses had to change to adjust for that. That's why you don't see guys just throw it to the post 20 times a game now, because you can play zone and you can have somebody come around the back and cut off the lane to get into the post. You can have somebody drop back to make the entry pass more difficult. You can zone up the opposite side of the ball so that there's really no avenue to get into the paint, even once you do get the ball in the post. That's why the game has become so pick and roll heavy, why you need guys moving around all the time, and why the level of physicality, even though people think of physicality just as like how hard you get hit, the amount of movement that guys have to do on every possession, the amount of times that they have to change directions and change directions so quickly in rapid succession, it puts so much strain, especially on your lower body. It's crazy the amount of physicality and stamina specifically that it takes to play defense now. And that is something that affects the way you're able to play offense, which plays into what you said about Edie. You just can't do the things that they did, at least as often as they did at Purdue.
That's actually a great point. I haven't really thought about that in the larger context of like, oh, they don't play defense in the NBA anymore. It's just so much more like you just gotta move, man. You just gotta. There's a reason why Jonathan Isaac is the greatest per minute defender in the NBA, but he can only do that about 16 minutes a night. Like, imagine what a Jonathan Isaac who could play 35 minutes a night would do. Like the Magic defense would get even better. It would be unbelievable. But yeah, it's just very hard to do. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean, look at
isolate really
Draymond
any of
Green.
them. Yeah.
Would Draymond Green have been the best defender in the league in the 1990s? Probably not. Like, it would just be Ewing and Olajuwon and David Robinson trying to post him up, and he's a really good post defender. But at a certain point, if nobody can help you, it changes things, and they could just drop a hook shot over your head. But he has been the best defender for the last 10 years because nobody is smarter about the the spatial contours of opposing offenses and what that means for what you need to do on defense.
I think you're. Well, that's really interesting. The idea of Draymond Green being tossed into an NBA that like doesn't value anything that he can do. Although the fact that he can't shoot, I suppose, would have mattered way less in 1998, and he could have made up for it with just like he is a very strong guy. Let's talk about the Western Conference. The New Orleans Pelicans. They have a bunch of basketball Twitter favorites. Trey Murphy. I mean, if you log on to
I love
the
Trey
NBA,
Murphy so much.
yeah,
I love him
basketball
so
Twitter,
much.
any NBA Discord, read the comments on Last Night in Basketball, Dunked on Prime, anywhere. People are going to be like, oh, well, why can't Trey Murphy be MVP? You know, it's like you only know about Trey Murphy the third if you are that in to basketball. But very weird spot where basically the ideal position for Zion in the NBA would have been to eventually evolve into a center. But he just, I suppose, kind of what we were just talking about, can't really do it defensively, can't move laterally enough, and is not explosive enough vertically, which is so weird to think about like Zion and rookie year Duke. Like he should be the most vertically explosive guy in the NBA. The Pelicans, do they trade Ingram? That was kind of rumored all offseason. They haven't yet. What do you make of the New Orleans Pelicans?
Yeah, so I think the Zion thing is really interesting, and it's similar to some other guys where Amari Stoudemire was unbelievably mobile and explosive as an offensive player. And he knew exactly what he was doing on that end. He could move so well, but you get him on the defensive side of the court, his foot speed looked like it was completely different than it was on offense. His vertical explosiveness, unless he knew that he was going for a block shot from the weak side, was not there because he didn't know what he was doing as well on that side of the ball. I think it's something similar with Zion, where he's not confident enough in his actions or confident enough in what he should be doing or where he should be or how to execute a certain defensive coverage against certain guys. And it makes things work a little bit more slowly than they do for him on offense. And that shows up in a certain way. With Brandon Ingram, I think it's just much more difficult to trade him than it would appear on the surface because of the new salary matching and salary apron rules. And I wrote about this as it concerns a couple other guys too. When we came into the offseason, I thought there was like 100% chance that the Raptors were going to trade Bruce Brown, who is a really good
That
player,
was so bizarre. The whole thing
but
was weird.
he's making like, 23, $24 million a year. And now if you take in even one more dollar than you send out in the trade, you cannot go over the first salary cap apron. And it's almost impossible to
Yeah,
find a
how
trade.
many teams are below even the first apron in the NBA now?
Not many. Like it's the teams that are under the cap for the most part. I don't know exactly the number that are under the first apron, but even if you are under, if the trade takes you over, then you can't do it.
Right.
That's why this uh, Carl Towns Mikal Bridges trade, or sorry, the Carl Towns to the Knicks trade got so complicated and took like a week to execute because neither the Knicks nor the Wolves were allowed to take in more salary than they sent out. So it took the Knicks like 4 or 5 days to be able to cobble together all the additional money that they had to send out in the deal. And the same thing happened with the Bridges trade, where they had to work out a sign and trade of Shake Milton to the Nets to be able to complete that trade so that the Knicks didn't take in more money than they sent out. And I think the same thing applies to someone like Bruce Brown, where he's a very good player, but to get above $22 million in salary, you're probably giving up somebody that you need. And
Right.
there are just not many guys that make enough money to be able to bring in a Bruce Brown or a Clint Capella or a Brandon Ingram where you can afford to send them out as a positive value asset. And if it's a guy on a huge contract who's a negative value, well, that's not going to work for the Pelicans. They want to be good. It's like, it's just really, really difficult to make these kind of trades work. I think, especially in season, because you can't do we're going to sign and trade 3 guys to the Hornets during the season.
What does it become more or less complicated to move guys in season? Because this is a weird thing. I actually recently just learned this about the NFL, and it is very evident after learning it. Actually, much easier to trade guys in season in the NFL. Davis, why would that be? Because half their salary's already been paid. A lot easier to trade. I mean, Amari Cooper, the Browns ate some money, but like for example, Devontae Adams. A lot easier to trade Devontae Adams to the Jets salary cap wise because half of his yearly salary had already been paid. Like literally, the money had already been transferred to Devontae Adams' bank account, and so therefore doesn't have to be paid by the acquiring team. Is that the way it works in the NBA, or is it more theoretical, like the way the salary cap stuff works?
No, it does work where like you don't like you pay the rest of the season salary from the time you acquire that guy, but that's not how it works for cap matching purposes. It's the total salary in, total salary out. So you can't say we're taking in a guy who makes 20 million, but Brandon Ingram only makes Ingram makes 21 million the rest of the year, so we sent out more than we're bringing in. It's got to be the full year salary for those, or it's prorated for everybody, so it's the same kind of thing. But I think part of it in the NFL too is that cap hits on the team that is trading the guy include a player's signing bonus, and that has already been paid out. Whereas the team that is trading for a guy in the NFL only has to pay his base salary. So the actual cap numbers that teams get when trading for players in the NFL are significantly different than what you think that their salaries are based on the numbers reported. Where in the NBA, it's not like that. Their salary is their salary. When you're trading Karl Towns making $40 million a year, he is making $40 million a year.
I guess the the
Only
apron
someone like me who actually covers both of those sports full time would have
knows the
any
difference.
reason
Yeah.
to know that. And it's stupid the way it works. I think you could, depending on which sport you follow more closely, you think the other one is probably stupid, but I think they're both stupid. Like none of this stuff makes any sense. The cap rules in every sport except for baseball, which is uncapped, and the only restriction on spending is if you don't want to pay more money. Every other sport, the salary cap rules are stupid. My brother follows hockey much closer than me, and he was
Yeah.
explaining to me that the salary cap works by day. So last year, the Rangers, who were up against the salary cap, would send dudes to the minors in between every game so that they weren't on the salary cap for an extra day, so they could then call them back up and not have like $3,000 count against the cap or whatever it was.
My God. That actually is like kind of interesting. There's like game theory stuff on top of that, and like, are these guys pissed off to like, does Vladimir Tarasenko like not get his full paycheck if he was like
Oh no, you
theoretically
can't do it
in
for guys that are like veteran stuff. It's only guys that
veterans,
are
young?
like young, like two-way contracts, same as the NBA. They have those in the NHL too. My brother explained all this to me one day, and it's like you can do the same thing. You can send them back and forth.
So do you think the aprons are working as intended? Because like I suppose the idea and why it passed was so that the Memphis Grizzlies feel that Joe Lacob can't just spend literally $1 billion to have the most competitive roster in the NBA. But, it does to me sort of feel short sighted, biting the hand that feeds, because let's be real, basketball is awesome. We all like to watch basketball. But what gets the most attention? What do people want to hear about? What gets podcast clicks? I'm sure you know this
Mhm.
from last night basketball. I bet if I had to guess, your most clicked thing this offseason was about the Towns trade. If I had to guess, the trades, the player movement, that is what people, and I don't know why, but that is what gets people super jazzed.
So for me, it was actually I did like live free agency analysis the
Yep.
day of July 1st, at starting June 30th at night. So that's what it was. But last year it was the Anunoby quickly Barrett trade was like by far the thing that people clicked on the most last year. And as far as the aprons go, I think they are having the intended effect that the owners wanted, which was not so much restricting Joe Lacob from spending $1 billion, but giving other owners an excuse for why they aren't spending $1 billion to compete with Joe Lacob, who is willing to do it. That to me is the biggest thing. And I know that a bunch of executives this offseason said that they think that the rules are working as intended, but there were others that said it has made things needlessly complicated with trades, specifically with the issue that I brought up, where the $1 more than you bring in hard caps you at the first apron, which is just an artificially low amount, and it just makes trades much more difficult. I think if that was changed to the second apron, things would be a lot smoother. It still would have been, a hassle for the Towns trade because of the Wolves, who are over the second apron. So you would have had to figure that out still, but it would just be a little bit less restrictive.
So yeah, I guess that's interesting. I would not have thought about it from that angle, that it's like so Mickey Loomis doesn't have to go all in or whatever. The Nuggets ownership.
Every CBA rule is about so owners don't have to spend more money than they want to compete. That's what it
Yeah.
is every time.
So well, speaking of which, the Denver Nuggets. I've heard kind of every opinion on the Denver Nuggets, from they're counting on Julian Strawther and Russell Westbrook and Peyton Watson to give them like real minutes for a team that wants to win a championship, to you have Nikola Jokic, you're basically a favorite in any 7-game series. If you put me on the two continuums, I'm probably closer to you have Nikola Jokic, you're a favorite to win any 7-game series. The bigger issue for them than any of that, than KCP being a Orlando Magic player or whatever, is what the fuck is going on with Jamaal Murray? Why can Jamaal Murray not play effective basketball anymore? Because that 2-man game was kind of really their edge.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I exist on both of those polls. I think to a certain extent, you have Nikola Jokic and you're the favorite in any 7-game series. But a lot of times, playoff series come down to being able to mitigate your weaknesses as much as they are about, imposing or accentuating your strengths. And I think they are a team that just has more weaknesses now than they did last year, and more weaknesses now than they did, especially 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they had a player where if any of KCP, Michael Porter Jr., or Aaron Gordon weren't giving you what you needed on that given night, you could close with Bruce Brown, with the other two guys alongside Jokic and Murray. And there were times they even closed with Brown and Jeff Green and one of those other two guys. There were times that they closed with Green and two of the guys with Brown on the bench. They don't have that anymore because they don't have that one guy who can be both your backup point guard and like a short roll screener as the 4-man, and run backward pick and rolls with Jokic and hit corner threes like they had with Brown a couple of years ago. They were sort of counting on Peyton Watson to develop some of it, and Watson is obviously an unreal defender, specifically as a help guy, and he brings a lot of that, but they don't have a lot of the things they did have. And now they don't have the absolute knockdown, no doubt about it, corner shooter in KCP. Christian Brown hit threes at a high level last year, but he didn't the year before. And he's not as consistent necessarily, I don't think. And he's not as good a defender specifically as KCP.
Right.
And that changes things a great deal for them too, because do you necessarily want him always on the best perimeter guy in the backcourt? And if you don't, well, then Jamal Murray might be on him, and you don't want that either. So it's just sort of a give and take. So I'm on both ends of the spectrum, where Jokic probably does make you a favorite, but you're just more able to be exploited than you were before.
Talk to me a little bit about Strawther and Peyton Watson, or I guess Zeke Naji. You want to talk about a guy who has been like NBA Twitter is like, oh my God, Zeke Naji. Wait until Zeke Naji makes some threes. Wait until they use Zeke Naji. Wait until they play Zeke Naji and Jokic together. Wait until Gordon doesn't have to play backup center. I mean, I believe this is literally year 5 for Zeke Naji. I need to fact check myself, but I'm pretty sure that's true. And we still haven't seen him. Which, well, no, it's year 4. It's year 4. Which is not to say it never happens though, because I remember Anthony Simons for the Portland Trailblazers basically being like, no, he's really going to do it. Like we feel pretty good about Simons. If we ever need to play him, he's delivering very well. Anthony Simons, it feels like he's new. He was drafted he was drafted in 2019. He never started a game until 2021. Like he was a bench player for a while. So I'm not saying it never happens, but Strother, Watson, Najee, anyone else on the bench. Sadly, Daron Holmes tears his Achilles. I mean, is there anything or any of those guys like legit breakout guys to you?
I was really excited about Holmes, so that kind of stinks. I am one of those guys who was early on Najee Island, and I'm sort of off it at this point. Like, if you haven't been able to earn minutes in 4 years, when there is a real need for backup big man minutes on your team, I just don't know if it's really ever going to happen. And I think to support that theory, they went out and signed Dario Saric this offseason. And I think if it was going to happen with Najee and they thought it was going to happen with Najee, that's not necessarily something that you go do. I love watching Peyton Watson, and I want him to be that guy for them and for him to be that breakout guy. But we saw in the playoffs last year, nobody guarded him and they weren't able to make up for it. Sometimes that happens with those guys that are really, really good defenders, but aren't really creators, and nobody cares if you shoot, even if you make them. So he's got to just become more dependable to the point where teams feel they have to guard him, whether that's as a shooter or as a creator. One of those two things needs to happen. Strother, I admittedly don't know as much about. He just didn't play a lot last year. I know that they're really high on him, and they've been high on some guys that have been able to come
Yeah,
in the
I'll tell
past.
you the same people who love Trey Murphy the third. These are also the Julian Strother people. It's just the Venn diagram is a big circle. NBA
Uh,
Twitter, big Julian Strother guys.
I forgot to talk about Trey Murphy earlier. That reminds me. I remember when he was coming into the draft, and my friend who loves the draft, I was talking with him about my favorite guys in the draft, and I said, we were talking about the guys at the top, and I was like, this is the guy I want the Knicks to be able to draft. I was like, do you remember when they passed on Mikal Bridges? Here he is again. That was sort of my description of him. I think he's become, an even better shooter and a little bit, of a different player, but I love him so much. Hopefully, Mikal can rediscover the shot that he's had for the first 5 years of his career, but we'll see. With Strother, he is definitely an internet favorite, and he was a draft Twitter favorite when the Nuggets took him. They kind of tend to do this where they bring guys along from the bench a
Right.
little bit slowly and, sort of see what happens in year 2 and year 3. And, I'm optimistic because they're usually right about these guys, not always. But, even Jokic was brought along pretty slowly for them. And he became, not to say that there's any remote chance that Strother's about to become, one of the, whatever it is, 15, 20 best players of all time. But, they've been right about bringing guys along slowly that they got in the late first or the second round before.
Yeah, who would remember that Nikola Jokic didn't average over 27 minutes a season until his third year in the league?
Yusuf Nurkic started ahead of him.
Yusuf Nurkic complained to get traded because he didn't want to play with Jokic anymore. People do forget that. All right, who do you want who do you want to talk about more? The Golden State Warriors and Los Angeles Lakers. We'll call this the ESPN segment. So if you watch what is it? NBA Today, I believe is the one with Perk and formerly Zach Lowe, not Zach Lowe anymore. You basically, this will be your menu. You'll either get Warriors talk or you'll get Lakers talk. So Jared, the choice is yours.
Yeah, anybody who reads Last Night in Basketball will know that I am much more interested in what happens on the court than I am in the soap opera. So I think from that sense, it is way more interesting to talk about the Warriors, just because so much is going to be different for them this year. No Klay Thompson. They bring in Kyle Anderson, DeAnthony Melton, Buddy Hield. They are going to play these young guys way more from the start of the season than they did last year. Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Brandon Pajemski. If I don't mention Trace Jackson Davis, my brother will have me killed. Um, all of these guys are going to be much more significant contributors than they were the last couple of years. And just the fact that a stalwart like Klay is not there and all of these other guys are, it's just way more interesting to me to think about what they're going to look like. We saw the Lakers last night. They brought back almost the same team that they had from last year. They even brought it up on the broadcast. Like, the Wolves made the conference finals and went out and made massive changes. The Lakers were in the playoff play-in 2 years in a row, and they came back with basically the same team. So Golden State, way more interesting to me.
Golden State, all right. Yeah, I mean, I think the Lakers, the equation is the night D'Angelo Russell makes shots, they'll probably play pretty good. You need unreal health for LeBron James and Anthony Davis. They got it last year. They probably are not going to get it this year. And we're going to hear a lot about LeBron's kid, who's going to play like 3 minutes a night. So cool story.
I don't know if he'll even, like, he got the 3 minutes last night. I don't know that I see him getting that consistently. Like, I feel like they did that last night, and he'll play a lot in the G League, like every second round pick does. It's really not a big deal if he goes there. But I don't think it's going to be like he gets that 3 minute second quarter stint every single night. I can't imagine that's going to happen.
Yeah. All right. So Warriors, your closing lineup for the Golden State Warriors, your 5 would be Hoomst.
Yeah, I think that this is the difficult thing because you really don't know. I think that Steph, obviously, and Draymond obviously have to be out there. I think given the way that he played for most of last season, you'd think Kuminga is going to be out there. Wiggins, like, why is he on the team if he's not going to be out there? And then you're talking about Moody, Pajemski, Anderson, Hield, Melton, Jackson Davis. That's 5 or 6 guys for one spot. Maybe there are certain nights where Kuminga's not out there. Maybe there are certain nights where Wiggins isn't out there. It's always going to be Steph and Draymond, and I could see it being any number of guys based on the matchup and how they're playing on any given night. And that's kind of dicey sometimes.
I wonder, in a different cap environment, if Wiggins would have just been traded without, kind of all the punishment, and like someone else could have eaten the salary or whatever, because Wiggins kind of feels like he's kind of the inconvenient truth for them right now, where it's like, one, if the reporting about why he was not available is true, it sounds like his personal life has just been like insanely turbulent for the last year or so. So that sucks. And
well, I would say just quickly, that's not been reporting. It's been just people sort of rumor mongering on the internet, which
correct.
Take that with about 10,000 grains of salt.
Correct. So regardless, he has been away from the team a lot for personal reasons. So just as like an employer and probably as people who care about Andrew Wiggins, you probably don't want to be like, well, we're benching you because you're not available because like crazy stuff's going on in your life. Then the hat on top of the hat is like, well, Kuminga's just been a better NBA player than you, which is slightly alleviated now by Klay Thompson being traded, and then unalleviated by acquiring Melton and Hield, who are like better shooters than Wiggins. I mean, Wiggins, I don't think would be in my closing lineup. I think my closing lineup would be Steph, Draymond, Kuminga. In a matchup where you need a center, it would be Trayce Jackson Davis, and then in most matchups, it would be Hield and Moody. I think probably would be what I would do.
Moody, Melton, Pajemski, like you could have any of those guys as sort of the second guard out there with Steph, or 2 of them if you don't need a center out there.
Yeah, I mean, you could do the all 3-and-D lineup. You could do not for you do Draymond, then you do Kuminga, Moody, Hield, Melton. You could do that as your close the third quarter lineup, and would probably be very good. Would probably be a very good lineup. I mean, I suppose it's not all that interesting or different than the Lakers stuff, other than that Curry has shown the ability in a way that LeBron is not. Like, LeBron is like, I don't know, the 13th best player in the NBA right now, probably at 40, which is insane. Not a diss to LeBron James at all. But Curry can have a 2-week stretch where he's literally the most impactful offensive player in the NBA, which if you're Joe Lacob, if you're the front, Mike Dunleavy Jr. is the GM now, it would just be so hard to be like, all right, guys, well, we're rebuilding. We're doing it. when he's still on your team.
You almost can't. You're going to be too good anyway. Like,
Yeah.
if he's out there on your offense and Draymond's out there on your defense, you can't be bad enough to rebuild. It's just not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, I think even more so than the ability to ratchet up, it's just defensively, LeBron isn't able to bring the same things that he did in the 2010s on a consistent basis, and that just matters more for the Lakers than the fact that Steph hasn't been a high level defender for most of his career. He's gotten himself to being fine for most of his career. It just matters more because even though the Lakers have Anthony Davis, they have more leaks elsewhere, like than the Warriors had over the years, and it's just Davis can make up for a lot. He can't make up for everything. And you can only count on LeBron to make up for the rest of that so many times in a season just because the dude is going to be 40 years old in 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it is.
That's crazy. I mean, I don't actually even know, but he's got to be the oldest player to have ever averaged over 20 points a game. Who's the oldest player to play in an NBA game?
I think Robert Parrish was the oldest player to play in a game, if I'm remembering correctly. And he so far demolished the scoring and assist and whatever records at 39 that it's like not even worth mentioning who the other people are. I wrote about it uh, over the offseason, but also he didn't just do that. He had an insane season for anyone of any age where it was like the only guys ever to average like 27, 8, and 8 and shoot 40% from three. It was like him 5 times, Larry Bird once. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like 5 guys ever, and he did it at 39. And the only guys who had ever done it, the oldest of them did it at 29. Like, he is a guy who has broken everyone's brains when it comes to the age curve. Like a few years ago, people were like, oh my God, how does Carmelo Anthony not have a job? And it's like, because he's 34 and commands playing time at a level that's not in accordance with his skill set. And that is what always happens to guys of that age, with
Yeah.
remarkably few exceptions. Like
No,
LeBron, KD, Steph, these guys are so far exceptions to the rule that
they're
like
so good.
you forget what the rule actually is. 99.9% of guys by the time they're 34, 35 years old are done. And 20 years ago, they were almost always already out of the league, not necessarily still being on teams and even playing at a level that is like bench player level. They were just done, period.
All right. So Kareem played at 41. Robert Parrish 43. So for LeBron and Vince Carter played at 43 for the Hawks. So that is the line for him. 43 is the line. Here's, I mean, and this is a good place for us to end. If LeBron is still playing at 43, which I think don't you think he would like to be the oldest player to have played an NBA game? Like almost for sure. LeBron wants every record. And you know what? He should, by the way. LeBron should have all of them. He should want every accolade. He needs every little piece of weaponry in his armory to go up against the Jordan people. Not to get political, but I think that would be fun. That would be cool for me as a huge fan of the game to be like, LeBron has been playing since I was in elementary school. I'm an old married man now. LeBron is still playing. But the issue obviously would be for a guy like LeBron is he's not going to be the 13th best player when he's 43. He's going to be like the 37th best player, that's hard for him. But we've seen, I mean, it's easier for kind of shitty players or like replacement level players to go be the 12th guy. Like it's kind of easy for Steve Kerr to be the 12th guy on the Spurs because he was never that guy. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. This is something that so many players struggled with as they transitioned from being a guy who was like very obviously the best guy on his team to someone who was not that. Like, that's why Allen Iverson's career ended. He couldn't deal with being like just the point guard or a guy who came off the bench. Tracy McGrady struggled with it for a while until he accepted it for a couple of years. Vince Carter probably did it better than anyone. And he had sort of three fully different second acts, in Dallas and Memphis and even Atlanta, where he was like an okay to very good bench player for those teams at times. It's really, really hard to make that transition. That said, LeBron could make it a little bit differently because he's a basketball genius and he's also 6'8", 6'9", and he can be like what Jason Kidd was late in his career with the
Kid is a good,
Mavericks.
yes. Kid, great comp. Like LeBron, go be backup point guard on the Cavaliers at
Oh,
43.
I don't even think backup point. Like he can start at point guard and be a guy who brings the ball up the court, moves the ball, gets everybody in position, and runs a pick and roll, fires the ball to literally wherever he wants because he's a supercomputer on the court. Like Tom Brady playing into his 40s, even in that final year where he wasn't the same physically, he was still making throws that really nobody else could make. Like LeBron could do that. I think as long as he is still able to physically get through a season and be able to withstand going through what he has to put himself through to be ready for a season and to survive the season and be ready for games. Like if you've ever seen him getting himself ready for a game in the hallway and in the locker room and whatnot, that even that, and that's just what we see in the hour and a half before a game, is crazy. The amount of work he's doing to get himself ready to play on a night to night basis. That's the same for most of these guys, really. But LeBron is on like another level just because that's what he's been doing for a while. And that strain, I think, more than an unwillingness to be a different kind of player, would be what might stop him from playing because he could be any kind of player that he wants as he gets older.
I personally would love to see, back like starting point guard Jason Kidd
Yeah.
style.
Or like
LeBron, like I'm gonna shoot 41% from three for a year.
he shot like 38, 39% last year, Like he could also be like, oh, I'm, 6'8" Sabonis now making plays from the post. Like
Yeah.
it's crazy that he can be both like 35-year-old Jason Kidd and Sabonis. It's the same in the same guy. And that would be like the extremely diminished version of him at 43 years old that we're imagining right now.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jared, let's get you out of here. Tell the people about last night and basketball, and we will send people that way and get back to the show next Wednesday.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Last Night in Basketball is a 3 times a week newsletter and also technically a website too, because I guess everything does go up on the website, where I write about basically the things that I notice on the basketball court and a lot of different trends and teams and players, just sort of examining what makes them good, what's working, what's not working, all different kinds of things. Where if you like the actual basketball part of the NBA, that's what I love digging into. And I've got a feature called 3 Things I Noticed on League Pass, which is exactly what it sounds like. I will show you 3 different things. Like last year, there was, Chet Holmgren's rim protection and the way that, despite the fact that he weighs less than I do, he doesn't really get bullied under the basket. Or Jalen Suggs, sneaking around a guy on the free throw line to grab himself a rebound. Or the Knicks running basically a quarterback option play for Jalen Brunson and things like that. Each week I do a video breakdown of something on Fridays. I just did the Brunson Towns pick and roll. I did something on Klay and Dallas over the summer. And then once a week, I just sort of write like a standard, like if you're reading about the NBA on any kind of website, what somebody might have to say about, the Lakers or the Pacers or Giannis or whoever. So I kind of try to cover every angle of what's happening on the court. And that's just at lastnightinbasketball.com.
There we go. Lastnightinbasketball.com. Everyone, if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you can also watch this on YouTube, and I'll be back with you all next Wednesday. Have a great day.